This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israelis go to the polls but once again end up with no clear winner. Will a unity government emerge? Could Israelis go to the polls for a third time? And the Middle East braces for a possible war with Iran after the attack on one of Saudi Arabia's main oil facilities. And Tel Aviv, a modern city fulfilling ancient prophecies. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Israelis went to the polls for the second time in less than 6 months, yet Israel's political future still remains unclear. Here's a look back at how the week unfolded, followed by analysis in our Jerusalem studio. Hours after the polls closed and early in the morning, Netanyahu came here to Likud headquarters in Tel Aviv to deliver what he called a short but important speech.
There will not be and there cannot be a government that leans on Arab anti-Zionist parties, parties that negate the very existence of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state.
Despite the disappointment of no clear winner, Netanyahu's supporters welcomed him after 3 a.m. with songs of Bibi, King of Israel. Netanyahu said he had already talked with right-wing parties, but hinted at a unity government with the opposition. Netanyahu is calling on Benny Gantz and his blue and white party to join him in forming a national unity government.
Benny, it's on us to form a broad unity government. Today, the nation expects us, both of us, to accept responsibility and work together.
In a video message, Netanyahu said he had met with the other right-wing parties and they would negotiate as a block of seats.
We cannot go to third elections. There's no reason to. I oppose it.
With more than 97% of the votes counted, Gantz's blue and white party is ahead with 33 seats to Netanyahu's Likud at 31. But 12 potential seats on the left are held by the Joint List, a combination of Arab parties. They have never been in the government and aren't likely to join this time either. Israeli President Reuven Rivlin pulled Netanyahu and Gantz together to pose for a handshake photo at a state memorial service for former Prime Minister Shimon Peres. But that's about as far as the unity is going for now.
The people chose unity. The people went for Israel to be before everything. And therefore, blue and white, under my leadership, won the elections. Blue and white is the biggest party.
Well, John Wage, CBN senior editor, and Julie Stahl, CBN correspondent. It's been a long week. We've been following these elections throughout the night sometimes and into the early morning at Likud headquarters. Here we are now after Benny Gantz has said he's going to be the one to form a government. So where do you think we are now? And John, what are some of the external forces that are coming into play right now?
Yeah, it's been interesting to be in Israel this week because it's constant. Everything is focused on the domestic number of seats, number of parties, who's going to finish out on top. And in the midst of that, the world is watching, and Iran and the Palestinians and other people are actually happy about the election results because it plunges Israel into uncertainty for a period of weeks, maybe even months. Right. And that is good news for the Iranians. That's good news for Mahmoud Abbas, who seems to be pretty joyful that Netanyahu might be deposed. So those are strategic considerations that, the Israeli voters didn't want to make that the number one priority. We learned that in our random man-on-the-street interviews that we did. But they're going to be forced, Israel as a government, to deal with the strategic situation, which always looms.
So, Julie, Netanyahu has been the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history. What impact do you think he's had on the region and particularly some of the Arab Sunni nations?
He definitely has. One of the complaints of the Israelis was he's been there too long, he's like a dictator. But actually that presence, that continuous presence, probably really gave him a lot of credit, a lot of respect throughout the Arab world. And we know in the last few years, he has been able to kind of bridge that gap with a lot of the Arab countries, even if they haven't quite made, diplomatic ties with Israel. We know that he's in contact with Saudi Arabia, with some of the Gulf Emirates. He's got pretty good ties with Egypt. So that long-serving presence actually was a benefit to Israel.
And we know in the Middle East, strength really does matter. Projecting strength, deterrence really makes a difference. John, here we are right now. Benny Gantz is saying he wants to be able to lead the next government. And we're looking at Reuven Rivlin now, sitting down with all the parties and asking them for a recommendation for who's going to lead the next government. Where do you see us standing right now? And tell us about what you think the results of the elections may not necessarily say that Israelis wanted a unity government.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things that, especially to hear the media account of this, which is that it's the end of Netanyahu, and everybody in Israel wants a national unity government. That's not really true when you see the numbers borne out, that especially among Israeli Jewish voters, there was a strong, even majority of the people who wanted to see a more right government, and it didn't materialize with the formation of how many parties made it into the Knesset and how many actually, how many seats were won. Plus you have the Arab bloc having 13 seats as the final count pretty much recommends there. So it's not a given that everybody wants a national unity government, but that's certainly the message that's being delivered through the media. I think one of the strategies of Blue and White will be to prolong this process, and they would like to see Netanyahu further weakened with a possible hope of a unity government without Netanyahu at the head of the party.
Julie, I mean, we're going to go through a long process now with Reuven Rivlin hearing the recommendations, and then see if it's Gantz that goes ahead and forms a government. Could take weeks. But also the Netanyahu and the right bloc may say there's no way you're going to form a government without our votes.
That's true, and he can't. It looks like Benny Gantz kind of won because his party got more seats than Netanyahu's. But if you talk about the overall picture, he really didn't, because the Arab parties, they've never joined a government, and he's not likely to ask the Arab parties, not because Israel's racist. There are still Arab Knesset members. There are Arabs in the various parties. But these particular parties really are against the state of Israel. So they're not going to join a government. So, it's possible Gantz won't be able to come up with a coalition government. I know we heard that one of the ultra-Orthodox parties now wants to go and see if he can talk to Gantz. So we don't exactly know how things are going to shape up.
Well, John and Julie, we've been following it all week. We'll continue to follow it. John, it's great to have you here in Jerusalem, by the way, for this election. You've been covering these for over 20 years. So, John, Julie, thanks a lot. Up next, the region braces for a possible war after an attack on Saudi Arabia and the world's oil supply.
They're testing us, they're testing the region, and I think if we don't act decisively now, the worst is yet to come.
Tension is escalating between the United States and Iran following the attack on Saudi Arabia's main oil processing facility. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says it was an act of war and that Iran is behind the attack. This as President Trump calls for more sanctions against Iran. CBN's Jenna Browder has the story from Washington, and we follow this with analysis with Middle East expert and New York Times best-selling author of The Persian Gamble, Joel Rosenberg.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called the attack on Saudi Arabia an act of war. But so far, President Trump has held his fire, stopping short of military action.
There's plenty of time to do some dastardly things. It's very easy to start, and we'll see what happens.
Seeking to build a coalition to respond to the attack, Pompeo issued the administration's strongest statement yet during his trip to Saudi Arabia Wednesday.
We were blessed that there were no Americans killed in this attack, but anytime you have an act of war of this nature, there's always risk that that could happen.
And on Twitter, Pompeo tweeting he supports Saudi Arabia's right to defend itself. Saudi Arabia says the drones and missiles came from the north, but has stopped short of saying Iran carried out the attack. Senator Lindsey Graham, one of the president's biggest allies, says the administration needs to act quickly.
They're testing us, they're testing the region. And I think if we don't act decisively now, the worst is yet to come.
President Trump, though, says not so fast.
I don't want war with anybody. I'm somebody that would like not to have war.
Standing with Robert O'Brien, his pick to replace John Bolton as National Security Advisor, Trump says all options are on the table.
There are many options, and there's the ultimate option, and there are options a lot less than that, and we'll see. We're in a very powerful position.
You say the ultimate option, are you talking
No, I'm
about
saying the ultimate option, meaning go in war.
Iran denies its involvement. Its foreign minister told CNN the consequences of a U.S. or Saudi military strike would be all-out war, and that Saudi Arabia would have to fight to the last American soldier. And Iran's leaders were scheduled to be at next week's UN General Assembly in New York, but it appears those plans are up in the air right now because their visas haven't come through. President Trump does say he would allow them to come. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Joel, great to be with you here on Jerusalem Dateline.
Great to be with you, Chris. Thanks for coming to Saudi Arabia with us. I'm glad that worked out. That was historic coverage.
You know, what's happening in the Gulf right now sounds like a Joel Rosenberg novel. Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, was just there, called what happened against Saudi Arabia an act of war. Saudis have a chance to, a right to defend themselves. What do you see happening right now in the Gulf?
Well, this was a brazen attack by Iran on Saudi Arabia, one of our main Arab allies in the region. And Pompeo is absolutely right. This is an act of war. The question is whether it starts a war or whether the U.S., the Saudis, and other allies find a way to restore some deterrence by punching back, but not in a way that, you know, sends the entire Gulf engulfed in a war. So that's the challenge for the U.S. and the Saudis right now.
Yeah, because the foreign minister of Iran says it could be all-out war if Iran is attacked.
Well, of course they're going to say that, and that's their bluff. They do low-level but serious attacks all over the region. The Iranians blow things up and they kill people, and then nobody really ever makes them pay, except for the Israelis. The only country that's actually actively pushing back and making the Iranians pay for their aggression is Israel, with airstrikes into Syria against Iranian targets every few days, every few weeks. So far, the U.S. and the Saudis and the Gulf states that have had their ships, their oil tankers seized and whatever, have not taken this type of action. And that's a real important question for President Trump. How do you restore American and Arab deterrence against Iran?
You were sitting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, just a few days ago. Did you bring up the subject of the threat of Iran?
We did. The meeting was off the record, 2 hours of conversation. But I would say we walked away with a real clear sense that the Crown Prince has a fierce determination to counter and neutralize the Iranian threat. Now, that was just days before this attack that we were with him, but there's no question the Crown Prince regards Iran as his #1 threat in the region. And the Crown Prince is looking for a much closer strategic alliance with the United States than the Saudis have ever had before. And this may be the moment to pull these two countries together even closer.
Talking about alliances, there's a report in the Jerusalem Post that Saudi and Israeli aircraft have been attacking Iranian militias inside Syria. What do you think of that report? And is that a sign of growing alliance between Saudi and Israel?
If it were true that the Saudis and the Israelis are hitting Iranian targets using fighter jets, that would be huge news. I'm not going to go based off of one report. We'll have to see. But I would say that this is a real test now for the United States Senate that has been beating up on the Saudi-American alliance for the better part of this year, and for understandable reasons. The Khashoggi murder, the Yemen war, very unpopular, and the senators are very critical. But this is the test now. Are you with Iran or are you with the Saudis? Each senator has to choose which side of this equation are you on, because now you've got Iran actually attacking the world's most important oil facilities. We in the United States don't need the oil as much as our European and Asian allies. So we've got to stand firmly with the Saudis, even while continuing to urge the Saudis to make many, many other changes.
You'll be going to Washington soon. What's going to be your message to take back to Washington?
Yes, I'll have the opportunity to be briefing people at the White House, on Capitol Hill, senators, and a number of think tank folks as well. But the #1 message is United States senators need to come over and spend time with the Crown Prince. This alliance is so important between the United States and Saudi Arabia. There are many concerns and strains in this relationship. But if I've been there twice to meet with the Crown Prince, for a total of 4 hours. Why have 98 U.S. senators not been in the past year? It's time for them to go and re-engage the Crown Prince because of their relationship being so important and because the Iran threat is so severe.
Well, that's an important message to take back to lawmakers and Washington. Great to be here with you in Jerusalem as well as Jeddah.
Coming up, the Bible comes to life in the modern city of Tel Aviv.
I shall rebuild you, and you will be built, O Virgin of Israel. This is the motto of those who established Tel Aviv.
Despite external threats like Iran and internal divisions, both now and throughout its history, Israel has survived and even thrived. One major example, Tel Aviv has become Israel's economic and high-tech center. As CBN's Scott Ross found out, the bustling city also fulfills biblical prophecy.
Situated on the shores of the Mediterranean, Tel Aviv could be described as Israel's New York City. And in just over 100 years, it's become one of the world's leading startup cities.
Tel Aviv was established in 1909. It is a very young city.
It is.
All this was sand here in 1909.
What was the vision for it?
And the vision was to establish here a modern Jewish city that speaks the Hebrew language, a foundation for a Jewish life. The idea was to realize the dreams, the hopes, the prophecies of our prophets and the dreams of the Jews all over the world. The most amazing thing about the Jewish people is the fact that we keep dreaming the same dream wherever we are through the centuries. Next year in Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem.
Who were the leaders, the people that founded Tel Aviv?
66 Jewish families. The inhabitants of the old city of Jaffa. Narrow alleyways, you know, sewage in the street, and an oriental city struggling. Jews in Jaffa dream about breaking from the walls of Jaffa and establish here a Jewish neighborhood. We paid in gold for every inch here. And the money was paid to whom? To the Ottomans? Who are the Ottomans? That's not their land. This was redeeming the land of Israel.
Isaac Dror is the education manager of Independence Hall, the location where David Ben-Gurion declared Israel's statehood and its founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence. We're seated here in front of Independence Hall. This is a significant place.
It is significant. It is really significant. It is the place where Israel was born. But it is also the place where Tel Aviv was established. It was the home of the founder of Tel Aviv. It was the first art museum of the city. In the book of Ezekiel lived in a place called Tel Aviv, a Jewish city in Babylon, where he was prophet. A tiny Jewish community in the desert of Iraq, exiled Jews.
In 1950, Tel Aviv and Jaffa merged to form Tel Aviv-Yaffo. It's also where Jonah caught a ship to flee from the Lord and ended up in the belly of a whale. Israel's founders sensed they were fulfilling prophecy. In the middle of this secular city, surrounded by construction cranes, one monument says it all.
This is from the Bible, Jeremiah, and it says here, I shall rebuild you, and you will be built, O Virgin of Israel. This is the motto of those who established Tel Aviv.
And as we stand here now, the prophecy is being fulfilled in front of your eyes.
In front of your eyes. It is the first time after 2,000 years, the Jewish people building the Jewish land, speaking Hebrew with their Bible in their hand, in the land of Israel.
Today, Tel Aviv is known as Silicon Wadi. What is it about Tel Aviv that so much creativity, innovativeness has come out of this area?
There's more than 700 startup companies concentrated in this city. There's venture capital that is being invested in Israel, which is the highest per capita in the world. Combined, of course, with Israel's culture and with Israel's circumstances, have made Tel Aviv what it is today, the second Silicon Valley of the world.
I met with educator Ze'ev Ben-Shahar, who gave us a modern comparison to the founding of Israel and Tel Aviv.
I think the whole venture of Israel is a startup venture. You can see this miracle around us today.
Tel Aviv has the third largest economy in the Middle East. I asked Ben Shahar about the future of Tel Aviv.
It is going to explode. The amount of high-tech companies, the amount of innovations that are developed here that are crucial to making the world a better place are going to come out of Tel Aviv, and more research and more funding is going to come into this city and hopefully create a better future, not just for Jews, but for Christians, Muslims, Buddhists around the world.
For CBN News, I'm Scott Ross in Tel Aviv.
Up next, how to pray for Israel as it chooses its leaders during this critical time. Finally, you may wonder, what does the Bible have to say about the Israeli elections? Well, you can look to both the Hebrew Scriptures and the New Covenant. In Psalm 75, it says, God is the judge. He puts down one and exalts another. In the book of Daniel, it says, He changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. In the New Covenant, Paul the Apostle wrote, I exhort, therefore, that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God, our Savior. Well, please pray for Israel as it goes through this political crucible. Well, that's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.